Before the world knew his name, before venture capitalists whispered about him in private rooms, before Databricks wrote a check that shook the AI landscape, Naveen Rao was simply a restless mind searching for the boundary between intelligence and computation. He didn't look like the caricature of a future tech revolutionary. No hoodie-clad teenager in a dorm. No silver-tongued CEO in a glass tower. He was instead a man shaped by two obsessions: how the brain thinks, how machines could learn to think better. Years later, reporters would call him a visionary. Investors would call him prescient. Engineers would call him one of the few who saw the inefficiency crisis of AI long before others did. But in the beginning, he was only a scientist with a question powerful enough to change the world. If intelligence is computation, why shouldn't we compute it more efficiently? That question became the seed for MosaicML, and eventually the reason why Databricks would acquire the company for a transformative sum. But to understand MosaicML's creation, you must understand the life, doubt, ambition, and fire that shaped the man who built it. This is the beginning of that story. Naveen Rao was not raised among supercomputers or research labs. He was raised in a quiet household where curiosity was tolerated only because it could not be stopped. As a child, he dismantled everything: radios, bikes, old VCRs, his father's calculators, the family alarm clock, twice. His mother asked him once, exasperated, "Why do you keep breaking things, Naveen?" He answered with a clarity that never left him, "I'm not breaking them. I'm learning how they're built." Some children read stories. Naveen read manuals. He didn't want toys, he wanted circuit boards. He didn't want Lego, he wanted soldering irons. By the time he was 13, he wasn't just taking things apart. He was building small circuits, mechanical toys, basic neural network code running on whatever hardware he could buy or salvage. His father didn't understand the details but understood the hunger. "If this is what you love, chase it," he said. "Even if no one else understands it yet." He would come to repeat that sentence years later, when others doubted MosaicML. In college, while most students were still figuring out majors, Naveen devoured neuroscience textbooks as if they were thrillers. He wanted to understand why the brain was so efficient, why machines were so inefficient, where intelligence came from, why neural networks felt so crude compared to neurons. When other students studied for exams, he stayed up mapping how dendrites performed nonlinear integration without wasting energy. His advisor once joked, "Naveen, you're not studying the brain. You're interrogating it." He laughed, but it was true. He wasn't chasing grades. He was chasing nature's engineering. That obsession carried him into a PhD in neuroscience, where he began asking a question that everyone around him found maddening. If a brain runs on 20 watts, why does a deep learning model need megawatts? Most dismissed him. "Brains and computers are nothing alike," one professor said. Naveen knew better. Not identical, but related. Not comparable, but connected. If the brain could build intelligence on a trickle of power, then machines could be redesigned to do the same. That idea would one day define MosaicML's mission. But it would take pain, failure, and betrayal to get there. After academia, Naveen moved into industry. His friends whispered, "He's too creative for corporate life." They were right. His first job was at Qualcomm, working on advanced hardware acceleration, one of the earliest glimpses of what modern AI chips would become. At Qualcomm he discovered two truths. Truth 1, AI models were evolving faster than hardware. Truth 2, hardware teams moved slower than scientific discovery. He loved the challenge but hated the bureaucracy. He could see the future, but had to fight to get anyone else to look. He built prototypes that astonished colleagues. He proposed architectures that shaved orders of magnitude off energy use. He argued that training neural networks was about to explode, and that efficiency would become the next global battleground. Leadership nodded politely and said, "Interesting. Not a priority right now." He learned his first painful lesson. Institutions don't innovate, people do. And institutions usually slow them down. But he didn't quit. Not yet. Naveen left corporate life to do something impossible. Build a startup that would revolutionize neural network acceleration before anyone else even realized it was needed. He co-founded Nirvana Systems, a company so far ahead of the curve that the industry didn't even have vocabulary for what they were building. It was 2014. Deep learning was exploding. But training was slow, inefficient, and brutally expensive. Naveen and the Nirvana team decided to solve this. Not halfway. Not incrementally. Completely. They designed custom silicon, new low-precision training methods, end-to-end optimized software stacks. Ideas so bold that even optimists called them insane. Inside the walls of a tiny office, the Nirvana team was building the future. And the world noticed. By 2016, big tech companies were circling like sharks. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Intel. They all wanted Nirvana. And then came the moment that would shape the rest of Naveen's life. Intel acquired Nirvana Systems. To the outside world, it was a triumph. Inside, it marked the beginning of a new struggle. At Intel, the Nirvana team hoped to scale their vision with the power of a giant. At first, it worked. More engineers. More resources. More silicon. More compute. More opportunity. But corporations are not built for speed. They are built for caution. The Nirvana silicon effort slipped. Deadlines stretched. Teams reorganized. Budgets shifted. Leadership changed. And slowly, painfully, the vision that Naveen had nurtured began to drift away from him. Engineers whispered in hallways. "This isn't what we signed up for. We could build so much faster outside. Why won't they let us run?" Naveen stayed as long as he could. He tried to push the machine from the inside. He fought for every idea, every decision, every inch of innovation. But eventually he faced a truth that broke him. The most important ideas of the next decade could not be built inside a giant. The giant was too slow. He left Intel quietly, with no fanfare. But he did not leave alone. He left with the embers of a revolution burning in his hands. Around 2018 to 2020, something happened that shook the world. Models began to grow. Not linearly. Exponentially. BERT. GPT-2. GPT-3. Megatron. T5. XLNet. PaLM. Suddenly, the world realized. AI wasn't just software. It was infrastructure, and it was expensive. Training a frontier-scale model meant millions of dollars. Thousands of GPUs. Weeks of compute. Painful inefficiencies. Bloated frameworks. Software pipelines patched together with glue. And beneath all of this, something even worse. No one truly understood how to make training efficient. They were throwing hardware at the problem, hoping something would stick. Naveen watched all of this from the outside and felt an anger he hadn't felt in years. "We solved this problem once," he whispered to a friend. But the industry wasn't ready to listen. Now, the world had no choice but to listen. In the months after Intel, Naveen took long walks, thinking about what came next. He talked with former Nirvana colleagues. He talked with researchers. He talked with industry leaders struggling to train models at scale. Every conversation pointed to the same conclusion. The world needed a new kind of AI company. Not one focused on building giant models, but one focused on making training itself efficient. A company that didn't just build smarter systems, but faster, cheaper, lighter ones. A company that democratized training the way open source democratized software. A company that would break big tech's monopoly on compute. One night, after talking with a former colleague over a late dinner, he wrote a sentence in his notebook. "We need a mosaic. A training system where every tile fits perfectly." And just like that, MosaicML was born. Finding co-founders is like finding co-conspirators for a revolution. You don't want the safe ones. You want the dangerous ones. The ones capable of building something too ambitious for rational minds. Naveen began meeting with engineers and systems architects he had admired for years. Some were former Nirvana teammates. Some were new faces with raw brilliance. Some were researchers tired of compromising inside slow-moving giants. He asked them all the same question. What if training didn't have to be slow? What if we could make it 10 times faster? 100 times faster? What if efficiency became the foundation of AI? Would you build that with me? One by one, they said yes. They didn't join for money, or prestige, or fame. They joined because they believed, as Naveen did, that the world needed an alternative. The core team formed. Machine learning researchers, GPU whisperers, distributed systems architects, compiler engineers, performance magicians, visionaries who dreamed in kernels and tensors. Together, they became the architects of MosaicML. Inside a small room, with a whiteboard that had long stopped being white, the founders debated names. Dozens of options. None felt right. Until someone, no one remembers exactly who, said quietly, "We're building a mosaic of components, right? Every piece clicks into place. Every tile matters." The room went still. Naveen whispered, "MosaicML." A name born from the idea that training AI is not one system, but a mosaic of interlocking parts. Each part, data loaders, sharded optimizers, distributed training, scheduling, quantization, kernels, fits together to create something beautiful. And suddenly, the founders realized. They were not just building software. They were building architecture. They didn't begin in luxury. Their first headquarters was a room that looked more like a server closet than a workspace. Cables ran like vines. GPUs screamed at 3 a.m. Half-assembled rigs sat on desks next to ramen bowls. The air smelled like heat, ambition, and burnt dust. It was perfect. This was not a place built for comfort. It was a place built for war. Because the next frontier of AI was not intelligence. It was efficiency. And MosaicML declared war on inefficiency. Most startups have company values. MosaicML had doctrines. Laws written in sweat and silicon. Doctrine 1: everything can be faster. No excuses. No exceptions. Doctrine 2: Efficiency is a human right. If only a handful of companies can afford to train models, the world is broken. Doctrine 3: Complexity is an enemy. Systems must be composable, modular, clean. Doctrine 4: Measure everything. What you don't measure, you can't improve. Doctrine 5: Own the stack. All of it. From data loaders to distributed systems to kernels. End-to-end control. End-to-end optimization. These doctrines became the heartbeat of MosaicML. The first major product, Composer, was a training library that felt like a revelation. It allowed model builders to plug together training optimizations like Lego bricks, layer freezing, augmentations, schedulers, precision tricks, better data loaders, smart optimizers, kernel-level speedups. It didn't promise magic. It delivered results. Companies adopting Composer saw training times drop by 30 to 40% overnight. Engineers whispered, "Who are these people? How did a small team out-engineer Google? Who built this? Wizards?" But Composer was only the beginning. The next phase was bolder. A full platform that let enterprises train models, LLMs included, at a fraction of the cost of the giants. Distributed training that actually worked. Scheduling that didn't choke. GPU efficiency that pushed hardware beyond expectations. A stack optimized for speed, stability, and composability. Suddenly, startups could train LLMs. Enterprises could train their own models. Governments could build sovereign AI systems. Researchers could experiment without burning budgets. MosaicML was smashing the walls that had kept model training exclusive. They weren't just building software. They were democratizing power. By 2022, whispers turned into headlines. MosaicML claims 10 times efficiency gains. A small team challenges big tech's AI monopoly. Democratized training? MosaicML says yes. LLM training for everyone. Investors began circling. Enterprises called non-stop. Behind closed doors, big tech strategists muttered, "If MosaicML can do what they say, we have a problem." They were right. MosaicML wasn't competing with them. MosaicML was liberating the world from them. The morning that MosaicML unofficially began did not look like the start of a revolution. It looked like a man pacing his kitchen floor in socks, muttering to himself between sips of lukewarm coffee. It was early 2021 in San Francisco. The pandemic had shaken the world, tech was surging forward faster than ever, money was flowing like a burst dam. And yet, Naveen Rao had never felt more like the industry was broken. The biggest companies were winning not because they were smarter, but because they had more GPUs, more infrastructure, more engineering headcount, more raw force of scale. AI had become a game of emperors, not innovators. He looked out the window at the fog banking over Twin Peaks. "This is not the future we promised," he whispered. Intel had been good to him, good salary, good team, good respect for what Nirvana had built. But he hadn't crossed continents intellectually just to maintain a division inside a titan. He wanted to build systems that pushed humanity forward, not systems that defended market share. Something inside him burned. A voice. Familiar. The same voice from the Nirvana days. "If you want a different world, build it yourself." And so he called two people. First, Hanlon Tang, a systems thinker with the mind of a mathematician and the instincts of a battlefield general. At Intel, Hanlon had been one of the rare engineers who understood the entire training pipeline: hardware, software, algorithms, constraints, trade-offs, everything. He possessed that mystical ability to diagnose a bug from nothing more than a faint smell in the logs. Hanlon answered the phone on the second ring. "You're calling early," he said. "I'm done," Naveen replied. "With what?" "With waiting. With holding back. With pretending the current trajectory of AI is inevitable. We need to build the infrastructure that actually makes sense." A pause. Hanlon spoke carefully. "You're thinking of leaving." "I'm thinking of building." Another pause, longer this time, heavier. Then Hanlon exhaled, slow and disbelieving. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack." "What's the idea?" And there it was. Naveen said the words he'd been pacing his kitchen rehearsing. "We democratize training." Training? End to end. All of it. Efficiently. Cheaply. Transparently. Full control. No black boxes. No monolithic frameworks where you need to sacrifice your firstborn to get a model to converge. We build a training stack that runs anywhere. Cloud, on-prem, your grandmother's garage cluster if that's what you've got. Hanlon laughed. "You want to rebuild the entire machine learning pipeline." "No," Naveen said. "I want to fix it." A quiet moment. Then the unmistakable sound of Hanlon standing up and pacing. "I'd follow you into hell," Hanlon said. "But this is going to piss off half the industry." "I know. And the other half will try to copy us." "I know. And the hyperscalers will try to bury us." Naveen smiled. "I know." "All right," Hanlon said finally. "Let's do it." The second call went to Jonathan Frankel, a researcher with fire in his eyes and the restless energy of someone who believed that science was a moral duty. Jonathan's lottery ticket hypothesis had shaken the machine learning world. He was one of the few people who understood deeply, quantitatively, how wasteful modern training had become. He believed that intelligence did not require bloated models or outrageous compute budgets. It required precision, strategy, and humility before the mathematics. Jonathan didn't even say hello when he picked up. He said, "You're leaving Intel, aren't you?" Naveen froze. "How did you?" "Because I've been thinking about it too," Jonathan said. "The whole ecosystem is backwards. The wrong incentives. The wrong bottlenecks. The wrong heroes." Naveen grinned. "So you're in?" Jonathan let out a breath that sounded like relief. "Tell me the mission." "Efficiency," Naveen said. "Real efficiency. Training that scales because it's smart, not because it's expensive. Models that respect hardware. Systems that treat compute as sacred." Jonathan's voice trembled slightly with excitement. "You're talking about a world where you don't need 1,000,000,000,000 parameters to get state-of-the-art. I'm talking about a world where every university, every startup, every kid with a dream and a workstation can build something meaningful." Jonathan was silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, "That's the world I want." The founding of MosaicML did not resemble the glamorous beginnings of Silicon Valley mythology. There were no dramatic rooftop meetings, no celebrity investors waiting with pens poised over term sheets. It was quieter, scrappier, more uncertain. They built their first prototype in a borrowed office that had the faint smell of old pizza and spilled Red Bull from the startup that had occupied it before. The windows rattled when buses passed. The Wi-Fi cut out if too many people opened YouTube at once. But inside that humble space, packed with mismatched desks, second-hand monitors, and a whiteboard covered in scribbles that looked like the ramblings of a mad scientist. Something extraordinary was forming. A doctrine. A philosophy. A rebellion. The Mosaic philosophy. It started as a sentence that Naveen wrote in blue marker on the whiteboard. Training should be a right, not a privilege. Hanlon added the next line. Hardware is not the enemy, inefficiency is. Jonathan wrote the third. Every parameter must justify its existence. And together they crafted the core belief that would shape everything they built. The future belongs to those who optimize. This became their internal oath. Their North Star. Their defiant answer to a world where scale had replaced ingenuity. The early team. They needed more people. They recruited not from the usual Silicon Valley glamour pools but from the quiet corners of research labs, open-source communities, and obscure systems engineering forums where people argued passionately about CUDA kernels and distributed gradient noise. They found Nikhil Prakash, who once wrote a custom memory profiler because existing tools annoyed him. Laura Diaz, a systems engineer who could make a GPU dance like a puppet if you gave her 2 days and a whiteboard. Arjun Raman, a distributed training savant who built cluster schedulers for fun. Yariv Adon, an Israeli researcher with a deep belief in open ecosystems and the moral obligation of scientific transparency. They didn't look like a traditional founding team. They looked like rebels, misfits, philosophers, hackers, pragmatists, idealists. Which was exactly what Naveen wanted. The problem with the world. Every member of the new team had felt the same frustration. AI research had become dominated by companies with budgets larger than some countries. If you didn't have tens of thousands of GPUs, proprietary infrastructure, armies of engineers, custom ASICs, and a willingness to burn money like firewood, you didn't stand a chance. This offended them. Not just intellectually, but morally. AI had started as a field of dreamers, people with notebooks, curiosity, and a deep desire to understand intelligence. Now it was a field of emperors. And MosaicML wanted to break the gates. The first breakthrough. The breakthrough didn't look dramatic. It didn't happen in a lab bathed in blue light or with triumphant music swelling in the background. It happened at 2:13 a.m. with Jonathan asleep on his keyboard and Hanlon reheating a curry he'd forgotten he ordered. The training run started like any other experiment, logs scrolling by, GPUs humming, temperature sensors blinking. But then something strange happened. The loss curve didn't wobble. It didn't plateau. It didn't spike. It fell, cleanly, smoothly, efficiently. Hanlon leaned forward. Wait, he whispered. No. That can't be right. He kicked Jonathan's chair. Wake up. Wake up. Jonathan jolted up, hair flattened on one side, imprint of a spacebar on his cheek. What? What happened? Did the cluster die again? Look. Jonathan stared. His eyes widened. We're converging 27% faster than baseline. No, Hanlon said. 32. He recalibrated. 35. Holy shit. They ran it again. Same result. Again. Same. Again. Same. Jonathan whispered. We just rewrote the rules of training. The second breakthrough. The second breakthrough was even bigger. They discovered that training could scale linearly, nearly perfectly, across machines, without the usual communication overhead that ate performance like acid. It shouldn't have been possible. But MosaicML made it possible. This time the celebration was loud. Someone brought sparkling wine. Naveen hugged Hanlon so hard he nearly cracked a rib. Jonathan danced even though he couldn't dance. Laura burst into tears. Arjun immediately started rewriting half the codebase to exploit the new discovery. It wasn't just a win. It was a paradigm shift. Training efficiency could be engineered, not guessed. Optimized, not brute forced. Understood, not worshipped like magic. For the first time, they felt like they weren't just building a company. They were birthing a discipline. The first clients. Startups came first. Small teams with big dreams but tiny compute budgets. Researchers at universities who were tired of begging for GPU time. Companies whose AI aspirations had been crushed by cloud costs. MosaicML showed them something no one else could. You can do this, Naveen would say, looking them in the eyes. You don't need to be Google or Meta. You just need the right tools. And one by one, they signed on. Every new contract felt like another brick in the wall they were tearing down. The industry reaction. At first, the industry ignored them. Then it frowned at them. Then it ridiculed them. Then, slowly, reluctantly, it grew afraid of them. Because MosaicML was doing the impossible. Training top-tier models at a fraction of the cost. Scaling with unprecedented efficiency. Delivering reproducible results. Offering transparency when the giants offered black boxes. Empowering small labs to match corporate labs. They weren't supposed to succeed. But they did. And that made them dangerous. The threat. Word reached the hyperscalers. A senior AI executive at a Fortune 10 company reportedly slammed his laptop shut and muttered, "Who the hell are these people?" Another leaked memo from a cloud provider said, "If MosaicML's claims are true, our GPU margin strategy is at risk." Naveen loved those quotes. They were framed in the office like trophies. The dark period. Success brought attention. Attention brought pressure. Pressure brought sleepless nights. The Mosaic team was still small. Demand exploded faster than they could hire. Some nights, they slept on beanbags in the office. Other nights, nobody slept at all. One evening, past midnight, the system crashed mid-training for their biggest client. The logs were corrupted. The cluster wasn't responding. Their reputation hung by a thread. Hanlon worked in silence, fingers flying across the keyboard. Laura coordinated debugging like a general under fire. Naveen felt his stomach twist. This was the moment investors feared. Jonathan refused to leave until the issue was fixed. 7 hours later, Hanlon pushed the final patch. The system roared back to life. The client never even knew how close it had been. But the Mosaic team did. They bore the scars. And yet, the struggle forged something powerful. A brotherhood. A sisterhood. A conviction. A shared war. The declaration. After that crisis, Naveen gathered the entire team. Some looked exhausted. Some looked determined. All looked changed. Naveen stood before them and said, "Big tech wins by building walls. We win by building doors." He paused. "Our goal isn't just to make training better. Our goal is to make training fair. Accessible. Transparent. Universal." He looked at each of them. "We're not building a company. We're building a future where intelligence is not owned by a few." Silence. Then applause, slow at first, then thunderous. That day, the mission crystallized into something deeper. MosaicML was not an engineering effort. It was a moral one. The model. They built their own models. Not because they wanted to compete with the giants, but because they wanted to prove a point. Efficiency is a superpower. Their models trained faster, cheaper, more predictably, with full reproducibility. It was a scientific flex, a technological challenge, and a philosophical statement all rolled into one. Open source communities began whispering about them. AI forums buzzed. Universities began teaching their training stack in classes. The giants noticed. And they didn't like it. The approaching storm. By 2022, something was happening in the world of AI. A tremor. A shifting of tectonic plates. The LLM era was dawning. GPT-3 had opened the floodgates. ChatGPT was around the corner. The industry was about to explode in ways no one could have predicted. But with that explosion came a new reality. Training became the new oil. Compute became the new battlefield. Efficiency became the new frontier. MosaicML wasn't just relevant. They were suddenly at the center of the storm. And in that storm, a new player watched them closely. A company whose data infrastructure ambitions were about to collide with the world of AI. Databricks. They were still distant then, a figure in the fog. But the collision course was already set. The future was accelerating. And MosaicML was hurtling toward destiny. The year 2022 began with a quiet panic. Not in the public squares, not in the newsrooms or shareholder meetings, but deep inside the server rooms of every AI startup on the planet. The GPU shortage had become biblical. Clusters were on backorder for 9 months. Prices spiked. Power contracts surged. And for the first time in history, even top-tier research labs whispered the unthinkable. Maybe we can't train the next model. MosaicML was still small, about 30 people, yet they were attempting something absurdly ambitious. To build a training platform so efficient that even in a GPU drought, people could still train world-class models. The world was screaming for scale. MosaicML whispered a counter-philosophy: the future belonged to efficiency. But whispers don't win markets. War does. And the war had arrived. Naveen stared at the screen in front of him, a spreadsheet of GPU quotes from every reseller on the West Coast. I feel like I'm negotiating with arms dealers, he muttered. Ivan laughed. Better, we're negotiating with arms dealers who don't care whether we live or die. Nick rubbed his forehead. This is insane. People are paying double. Triple. I heard one lab offered to name a building after their supplier. It was all true. Naveen closed the laptop slowly, deliberately. His voice remained calm, but everyone in the room heard the steel beneath it. This shortage will kill half the companies in our space, he said. But it won't kill us. Because we aren't building a company that depends on more GPUs. He paused. We're building the company that teaches the world how to use less. Silence. Then a slow smile crept onto Ivan's face. And then Nick's. This wasn't a crisis. It was a crucible. The perfect one. Over the next 9 months, MosaicML transformed itself into a monastery of optimization. Every whiteboard became a battlefield map. Every engineer became a weapon of mathematical precision. Every model became a proving ground. They invented techniques that would later become industry standards. algorithmic sparsity that cut training flops by as much as 50%. Sharded optimizers that made memory overhead shrink like plastic in a fire. Operator fusion that melted dozens of CUDA kernels into one. Data streaming systems that kept GPUs fed like never before. Scheduling strategies that squeezed every watt of computation from every card. And then there was the crown jewel. Composer, MosaicML's training engine. It did not simply train models faster. It rewrote the rules of training. Naveen remembered pacing the office late one night, staring at the prototype running on a small cluster. The numbers didn't make sense. The improvement was too big. Too clean. Too real. When the graphs loaded, for the first time since Nirvana, he felt the raw thrill of scientific discovery, the kind that makes a person whisper to themselves, "Holy shit! We've built something impossible." Word spread quietly at first. A Stanford lab tried Composer and reduced training time by 60%. A self-driving startup used MosaicML's data pipeline to cut their costs in half. A top-secret government lab, one that didn't even tell them what they were training, wrote a single line. "Your system made our job possible." Investors noticed. Competitors noticed. GPUs noticed, probably out of fear. And then came the moment that changed everything. A Fortune 100 tech company tested MosaicML's stack. Their feedback? Just one sentence. "If this is real, you'll change the entire industry." While MosaicML built its empire of efficiency, the world entered a new age. Not the age of AI. That had already begun. This was the age of open models. The most unlikely revolution. Born not in giant corporations, but in research collectives, startups, online forums, and midnight experimenters. Models that once cost tens of millions to train were suddenly accessible to everyone. And in that moment, the market desperately needed a company that could help people train and deploy their own LLMs, bigger, better, cheaper. A company like MosaicML. On a rainy March morning, Ivan pushed a keyboard across a desk toward Naveen. "MPT 7B is done." Naveen raised an eyebrow. "Good?" Ivan grinned. "Not just good." He clicked enter. Numbers appeared. Training time. Cost. Accuracy. Benchmark scores. Nick leaned back in his chair. "No way." Naveen whispered, This shouldn't be possible on our cluster." But it was. MPT became Mosaic's first widely known open model. Then MPT 30B landed. And the internet lit up like a solar flare. Companies downloaded the models in droves. Developers evangelized them. Enterprises whispered, "We can train our own GPT-like models now." Competitors laughed at first. Then they stopped laughing. Because the world had begun to shift. People no longer wanted a single giant model run by a single giant company. They wanted control. Customization. Ownership. MosaicML gave them all three. Suddenly, Mosaic wasn't just a training efficiency startup. They were something bigger. Something the world wasn't sure how to categorize. A model lab? A platform company? A cloud alternative? A training engine? A research group? They were all of those. And none. This ambiguity made them dangerous. But it also made them magnetic. A CEO of a major enterprise approached them. "We can't send our data to big tech clouds. We need our own models." A biotech company. "We want to train a model on our proprietary sequences." Not share with anyone. A financial firm. We're not renting intelligence. We're owning it. And then came the ultimate question. Can you help us train a frontier model ourselves? MosaicML didn't flinch. Yes. That one word set events into motion that would culminate in a billion-dollar climax. But they didn't know that yet. What they knew was this. The world was waking up. The world wanted agency. The world wanted MosaicML. Every startup has its mythology. Airbnb has the cereal boxes. Stripe has the Irish brothers coding like clockwork. OpenAI has the rooms full of researchers drawing equations on glass. MosaicML had something different. A covenant. Not written in a contract. Not formalized in any legal sense. But real all the same. It began on a night when the founders sat together in the office kitchen, long after midnight, surrounded by empty cans of yerba mate and whiteboards covered in hieroglyphic math. The city outside was silent. The storm inside was not. So, Nick said, "What do we want this company to be?" Really? He didn't mean revenue goals. He didn't mean valuation. He didn't mean headcount. He meant purpose. Ivan stirred his tea. I want us to prove that efficiency is not the poor cousin of scale. It's the future. Naveen leaned back. He had been thinking about this for months. Maybe years. My whole career, he said slowly, I've been fighting the idea that intelligence has to be expensive. That only a few companies deserve to build it. That to innovate, you need infinite capital. He looked at them, really looked. We're not here to build the biggest models. Or the flashiest demos. Or the most famous brand. He tapped the table twice. We're here to democratize training. To make intelligence buildable, not rented. To give companies control over their future. Silence settled. A profound one. Naveen added, almost whispering. And we do it without bullshit. Without shortcuts. Without hype. We do it by building the smartest system in the world. In that moment, the covenant crystallized. MosaicML existed not to make AI cheaper, but to make AI sovereign. The next 9 months were a blur. Not a startup blur. A mythological blur. The kind that defines eras. Mosaic's engineering team had become a legion. People joked that joining Mosaic was like joining a martial arts temple for computer science. You didn't come to chill. You came to transcend. A new hire once said. On my first day, I realized I was the dumbest person in the room. By week 3, I realized that was the point. They recruited research scientists who could write CUDA in their sleep. Distributed systems wizards who tuned clusters like orchestras. Optimization experts who treated bottlenecks like personal insults. But more importantly, they recruited believers. People who saw the future the same way Naveen did. As something that must be built, not inherited. While competitors built AI applications, MosaicML built something deeper. A training operating system. Not a product. A platform. A philosophy. A way of thinking about computation itself. Composer. Streaming dataset. Mosaic Cloud. MPT. Inference engines. Data layer rewrites. Deployment orchestration. Piece by piece, they built an end-to-end system that could train anything, from a small model to a frontier model, with ruthless efficiency. Investors didn't understand it at first. Competitors pretended not to. Customers understood it perfectly. When MosaicML unveiled its unified platform, the industry gasped. This wasn't a patchwork. It wasn't an API bolted to a cluster. It was a weapons system. A Formula One car for training. A Stradivarius in the hands of anyone who dared play. And suddenly, the world realized. Instead of renting AI, companies could build AI. Instead of worshipping scale, they could optimize scale. Instead of depending on a handful of tech giants, they could empower themselves. This was the pivot point. The fulcrum. The moment before the acquisition storm. One afternoon in early 2023, Naveen's phone buzzed. He didn't recognize the number. He answered anyway. "Hi Naveen, this is, well, you know who I am." He did. Everyone did. It was a founder of Databricks. A company that had built an empire on data. A company hungry for AI. A company that saw in MosaicML not a competitor, but a missing piece of a global system. "Listen," the voice said, "I've been following your work for months. What you're building isn't another AI startup. It's the infrastructure to power the next decade. Let's talk." A pause. And let's not pretend this is casual. The first meeting happened in a glass-walled conference room overlooking San Francisco. The air in the room hummed with tension. Ollie from Databricks leaned forward. "We see the future the same way," he said. "AI is not separate from data. It is data, transformed." Naveen nodded. "And training is where that transformation happens. If you don't own training, you don't own AI." Ollie smiled. Exactly. It was like two generals realizing they had been fighting the same war from different fronts. Databricks didn't dance around the subject. "We don't want a partner," Ollie said. "We want to combine forces." Naveen felt his pulse steady. Why? Ollie's answer was immediate. "Because together, we can build the world's first truly open, enterprise-grade AI ecosystem. And because your team has built something no one else has. A training engine that actually works." Naveen left the meeting and walked 3 San Francisco blocks in total silence. He stood at the top of a hill overlooking the city. MosaicML could stay independent. Become a giant on their own. Rewrite the map of AI infrastructure. But joining Databricks would give them something independence never could. A global customer base. Planet-scale infrastructure. The ability to put Mosaic's philosophy into every enterprise on Earth. It wasn't a question of exit. It was a question of destiny. And destiny had come calling. The negotiations were intense. Not antagonistic. Intense in the way great symphonies are intense, full of precision, stakes, and the knowledge that the outcome would echo for decades. The offer was enormous. Nearly $1.3 billion. Some said $1.2 billion. Some said $1.5 billion. The truth is known only to the people in the room. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that this was not an acqui-hire. Not a tech grab. Not a talent scoop. It was a coronation. A recognition. A joining of empires. On the eve of the final signing, the founders gathered alone in the office. No investors. No lawyers. No Databricks executives. Just them. Ivan spoke first. "Feels surreal." Nick added, "Feels right." Naveen walked to the whiteboard, the same one they had used since day one, and wrote 3 words. "We did it." But then he crossed out "did" and replaced it with "we begin." Because this was not the end of MosaicML. It was the beginning of MosaicML 2.0, integrated with Databricks, scaled to the world. When the acquisition announcement hit the internet, the ripple turned into a tidal wave. Twitter exploded. LinkedIn melted. Tech journalists scrambled. Competitors panicked. Engineers cheered. VCs wrote posts about how they always believed in MosaicML, even when they didn't. Naveen opened his inbox to hundreds of messages. But one stood out. A researcher wrote, "You showed the world that intelligence doesn't belong to the few. It belongs to the builders. Thank you." He felt something shift inside him. Not pride. Not relief. Something deeper. Impact. After the acquisition, Mosaic's team moved into Databricks headquarters. But they didn't become Databricks. Databricks became part Mosaic. Training became central to Databricks' mission. Open models became part of the corporate strategy. AI infrastructure became the company's heartbeat. Thousands of enterprises adopted MosaicML. Governments deployed it for sovereign AI. Research labs used it to train frontier science models. Startups used it to replace cloud giants. The world had asked for a way to build its own intelligence. MosaicML had delivered. Months later, Naveen sat alone in his home office. A rare quiet moment. He was no longer CEO of a startup. He was now VP of Generative AI at Databricks. But his mission hadn't changed. He opened a notebook and wrote 3 lines. AI for builders. Efficiency as a superpower. Intelligence belongs to humanity. He closed the notebook. And he smiled. Because he knew. The real story had only just begun. In early 2023, the world felt like it had accelerated. Every week brought a new model, a new benchmark, a new whisper of revolution. Every day, news feeds overflowed with AI predictions that oscillated wildly between utopia and apocalypse. But for the engineers inside MosaicML's Oakland office, a cluster of renovated warehouses that smelled faintly of espresso and GPU fans, none of that noise mattered. What they cared about was efficiency. Not hype. Not headlines. Not fundraising theatrics. Just the cold, brutal mathematics of making large models trainable for everyone, not only trillion-dollar empires. At the center of all this was Naveen Rao, who felt something shift deep in his chest every morning he walked into the building. It was subtle at first, a quiet hum, a sense of inevitability, a whisper suggesting that MosaicML was approaching a threshold from which nothing would ever be the same. He didn't know if it was intuition or simply the cumulative stress of millions of GPU hours orchestrated by the team. But he did know this. They were about to change the direction of the entire industry. ChatGPT had detonated like an asteroid. Enterprises panicked. Startups scrambled. Governments issued statements. VCs lost sleep. Every CEO asked the same question. Do we have a large language model strategy? Even companies with no use for literature, linguistics, or logic suddenly demanded a roadmap for generative AI. Meanwhile, MosaicML, quiet, methodical, and almost ascetic, watched the frenzy from the sidelines. They weren't chasing flash. They weren't trying to impress journalists or capture attention. They were building the plumbing. The kind of foundational infrastructure that determined who could join the AI race. And who would be left behind. But it didn't take long for the giants to notice. NVIDIA. Google. Meta. Amazon. They were all moving. And each of them had the same strategic certainty. Whoever controlled training efficiency controlled the future. Every percentage point of speed mattered. Every optimization mattered. Every clever reduction in memory footprint mattered. Because training large models wasn't a technical problem anymore. It was an economic one. A poorly optimized training run on 2000 GPUs could burn millions. A well-optimized one could cost half, maybe less. That was where MosaicML lived. In the arithmetic of the possible. In the meticulous art of extracting life out of silicon. Industry giants realized that MosaicML wasn't just a competitor. They were a threat. Not because they made bigger models, but because they made the barrier to entry lower. A lower barrier meant more players, more competition, more disruption. The giants hated that. And yet, others saw opportunity, including one company that would change everything. It began with a message from Ali Ghodsi. Not a formal email. Not a corporate overture. Just a short, almost casual line sent late at night. We should talk. I think our missions align more than you realize. Naveen stared at the message. Missions? Databricks had always been the data company. The cloud infrastructure phenom. The Spark revolution. They processed logs. Stored petabytes. Ran pipelines at absurd scale. But a new question had begun echoing across Silicon Valley. Who will become the AI platform for enterprises? Suddenly, Databricks wasn't just a data company. They wanted to be the backbone of enterprise AI. And they knew, the whole world knew, that efficient training was the missing piece of their empire. So Ali flew down to the Bay Area. No entourage. No theatrics. Just two founders meeting in a modest conference room overlooking the port of Oakland, a place where cranes move containers as if guided by invisible hands. Ali spoke first. Big companies don't know how to build models, he said. They're scared. They're lost. They think AI means buying an API key. Naveen nodded. He'd seen it firsthand. Ali continued. Databricks has the data. You have the training. Together, we give enterprises the full stack. We give them independence. We give them control. Naveen felt something shift. This wasn't a pitch. It was a vision. A vision that rhymed with MosaicML's guiding principle. AI should not be concentrated in the hands of a few. The meeting lasted 6 hours. But when it ended, something was clear. This wasn't about acquisition. It was about alignment. About accelerating the mission. About connecting the missing pieces. About giving the world a decentralized alternative to big tech's lockdown LLM pipelines. The kind MosaicML had always fought against. But it wasn't Naveen's decision alone. He gathered the core team, the engineers, researchers, product leads who had spent years sculpting the MosaicML stack like it was a living organism. They sat around the long wooden table in the communal kitchen, laptops open, espresso machine hissing in the background. Naveen didn't sugarcoat it. Databricks wants us, he said. And they're serious. Murmurs. Raised eyebrows. The kind of energy that ripples when a life-altering possibility enters the room. But, Naveen added softly, I want your honest thoughts. All of you. A young engineer spoke first. How much freedom would we lose? She asked. Another muttered. Will they let us keep building? Or will we get absorbed and forgotten? A third voiced what many feared. Will joining a giant undermine our mission? We're here to democratize training, not help another big company control the stack. Silence. Naveen took a long breath. We won't be swallowed, he said. Ollie doesn't want to clip us. He wants to amplify us. He walked to the whiteboard. This is not surrender, he said. This is acceleration. He drew 2 lines. Line A, MosaicML alone. Slower scaling. Compute limits. Slower enterprise adoption. Harder competition with trillion-dollar giants. Line B, MosaicML with Databricks. Access to massive customer base. Integrated data plus training stack. Long-term stability. Much faster democratization. We always said our mission is to make efficient training accessible to everyone, he said. With Databricks, we reach millions. Not thousands. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then the head of distributed systems, who had spent half his adult life inside data centers, smiled. So let's do it, he said. Let's move faster. The dam broke. Voices rose. Fists hit the table. Someone cheered. They were in. The following months blurred into a whirlwind. Dozens of meetings. Endless due diligence. Technical deep dives. Legal marathons. Financial modeling late into the night. It felt like preparing for a rocket launch while building the rocket at the same time. But something remarkable happened. Every Databricks engineer who met MosaicML's team walked away in awe. The efficiency results. The training stack. The reproducible pipelines. The philosophical clarity. Ollie said it best. You all built a miracle. Meanwhile, MosaicML engineers toured Databricks' massive infrastructure footprint. Petabytes flowing through systems like cosmic rivers. Compute fleets large enough to train a small universe. Entire enterprise ecosystems built on Spark. The possibility of combining these forces felt unbelievable. Like placing 2 halves of an ancient artifact together and watching power awaken between them. The only question left was price. And when the final number was written onto the table, $1.3 billion. The air in the room changed. It wasn't just money. It was validation. Recognition. A declaration that efficiency wasn't a side quest. It was the frontier that would define the next decade of AI. The evening before final signatures, Naveen walked alone along the Embarcadero, the bay wind cold against his face. Across the water, lights shimmered along the piers. San Francisco's skyline hummed like circuitry. He felt something unexpected rising in him. Not triumph. Not pride. But reflection. He sat on a bench facing the water. He thought about his early years studying neuroscience. How he'd stared at neuron firing patterns and wondered if intelligence was simply a computation waiting to be decoded. He thought about nirvana. Then Intel. Then leaving. Then starting again with almost nothing. He thought about the MosaicML engineers, each one carrying a spark he recognized. An instinct to rebel against limits. He thought about the giants dominating AI. The monopolies. The opacity. The belief that only the wealthy deserved access to these tools. He thought about the people they'd met along the way. Small teams with big dreams. Who wanted to train models but couldn't afford to. Or didn't have the technical expertise. Or lacked the infrastructure. And he thought about what it would mean to give all of them a chance. To open the gates. To democratize the frontier. Behind him, a couple walked past, whispering about ChatGPT. A jogger ran by playing a podcast discussing AI regulation. A group of tourists took pictures beside a sculpture made of metal rings. The world had changed. And he would help shape what came next. He whispered to himself. This is just the beginning. The next morning, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Databricks headquarters, the documents lay open. Pens clicked. Hands shook. Smiles, wide, exhausted, relieved, spread around the room. When Naveen signed the final page, applause erupted. But Ollie leaned in and said something only he could hear. Let's finish what we started. The news hit Silicon Valley like a lightning strike. Databricks acquires MosaicML for $1.3 billion. Analysts scrambled for takes. Competitors panicked. Startups rejoiced, finally, a path to affordable training. VCs whispered urgently into phones. Employees across both companies felt a surge of electricity. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a statement. That efficiency mattered. That open access mattered. That the future of AI wouldn't be dictated solely by trillion-dollar tech giants. It was a battle cry. The financial outcomes were substantial. Founders, early employees, investors, all saw life-changing returns. But the team didn't celebrate with extravagance. They returned to work. Because Databricks had given them something more valuable than money. Scale. Within months, MosaicML's tooling integrated across the Databricks ecosystem. Customers who once struggled to train modest models now launched LLM projects confidently. Training that once cost millions now cost hundreds of thousands. Then tens of thousands. Then less. Model reproducibility improved. Efficiency skyrocketed. Enterprise LLM adoption exploded. And in a corner of Databricks HQ, the small team that had once tinkered with training pipelines in a warehouse watched their ideas go global. They'd done it. They'd changed the landscape. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Naveen wandered through Databricks' quiet office. He ended up in a conference room where someone had left a whiteboard full of scribbles. Memory optimizations. Distributed training experiments. Scaling laws. Notes from a customer trying to build an internal LLM. He smiled. It was the same handwriting he'd seen at MosaicML. The same passion. The same hunger to push boundaries. He sat down, grabbed a marker, and added a note at the bottom. Build for everyone, not the few. He capped the marker, turned off the lights, and stepped into the hallway. Because the mission wasn't over. Not even close. As long as there were people shut out of AI. Students, researchers, startups, entire nations. The fight continued. And MosaicML's legacy, now woven into Databricks' vast architecture, was the belief that intelligence should not be gated by wealth or power. That efficiency was equity. That compute was freedom. That access was destiny. Naveen walked into the night, city lights stretching before him like circuits on a motherboard. Behind him, the future hummed. Ahead of him, a new frontier waited. And he stepped toward it. Not as a conqueror. Not as a billionaire. Not as a founder whose company had been acquired. But as a builder. A rebel. A scientist. A believer in democratized intelligence. A spark still burning.